See, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Tonight, reporting from Washington, Sam Donaldson.
Good evening. The first wave of returning U.S. military personnel came home today from the Persian Gulf. Came home to a reception the likes of which the veterans of America's last war, Vietnam, never saw. Like almost everything else in the highly successful U.S. effort in the Gulf, it all happened in storybook fashion. There were happy loved ones, cheering crowds, and the thanks of a grateful nation. The very first troops to be sent to the Gulf last August were from the 82nd Airborne Division based at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Some of them were among today's arrivals, and ABC's Al Dale was there.
They had been waiting for 7 months, almost to the day. Anticipation made a cold, rainy day bearable, and finally they were here. More than 900 soldiers of the 82nd back on American soil. The official welcoming ceremony was cut short after the waiting family members began chanting, "Let them go." And so they did. Suddenly, bedlam on the tarmac as soldiers and those they had left behind were reunited.
Happiest day of my life.
Oh, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus.
You miss me, too?
He's got to be here. He's just got to be.
It took a while for some to find each other.
Who are you looking for?
My husband. What are you
going to do when you find him?
You don't want to know.
This is a particularly joyous homecoming because the 82nd, which saw action deep inside Iraq, suffered no combat deaths.
Their experience in the desert now a memory.
What did you miss most out in the desert? This, right here, food.
But mostly thoughts were on the present and the future.
Oh, yeah. Got my sanity back.
7-month-old Samantha was born just 2 days after her father shipped out.
Happy to see her, Al.
Over the days and weeks ahead, the rest of the 15,000 members of the 82nd sent to the Gulf will come back to victory celebrations and the things they missed the most. Al Dale, ABC News, Pope Air Force Base, North Carolina.
At many other bases, many other homecomings. The 1st Air Force Fighter Squadron to go to the Gulf was the first to return today to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Farther south, in Georgia, the return of the Army's 24th Mechanized Infantry. Behind the tears of joy, there was also much in evidence the military has made preparations for days ahead, which may not be so simple. Here's ABC's Mark Potter.
Here at Fort Stewart, the emotional reunions continued all day. For most, after 7 months of separation, this is a happy time with lots of love and support. But family counselors warn that some couples may suffer marital problems caused by the long separation. And Fort Stewart has set up a reunion task force to help them adjust.
The husband's been away for a while. The wife's become more independent. The wife may be hesitant to give up some of that independence when the husband gets home.
This morning, Marie Milia and her 3 children were reunited with Major Mark Milia. Today, they are getting to know each other again.
Hopefully we'll go back to the way things were and just like it never happened, but I kind of doubt that'll happen.
While Mark was gone, Marie ran the household and became more assertive.
My priorities have shifted a lot to, I guess some people would call it some self-centeredness there for the first time in my life.
For the Milias and other couples, once the euphoria wears off, readjustment may take a lot of work. But they also predict their marriages and families will flourish, because the long separation also made them appreciate each other more. Mark Potter.
1,000 Kuwaiti citizens, part of a much larger number who had been kidnapped by the retreating Iraqi army, were released and came home to Kuwait. You may have seen the first pictures, which showed some happy people, overjoyed to have their freedom once again. But as the hours passed, another picture emerged, one, as Jim Wooten reports, that contains misery as well as happiness.
When the Iraqis freed them near the border last night, they were cold, exhausted, sick, and hungry, and their ordeal was not yet finished. Only one Kuwaiti officer had been sent to process them, a bureaucratic nightmare that lasted well past dawn. Ahmed Al-Alawi had had enough. After what we've been through, he said,
and none of the Kuwaiti officials here, they are not worth even to be looked at. How about the 25,000 inside? Are they going to face what we are facing here?
so he led a group on foot from the border, not waiting for the government's buses, joining refugees from Iraq on the highway headed south. Some of those released were flown to a hospital in Kuwait City ahead of the rest, along with that lone Kuwaiti officer who read the names of those who'd soon be there to a crowd of relatives below. They were worried, hoping, and waiting for this moment. And waiting, finally, for this. All over the capital today, for 1,000 fragmented families, the war was over at last. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Kuwait City.
Iraq today released 2 men it says were captured American soldiers. The only problem is the Pentagon says the men don't appear on any of its lists. Iraq says the 2 were captured in Basra. 40 foreign journalists were also released today after they'd been missing for a week. They, too, had been detained in the Basra area as they attempted to cover the unrest there. That unrest continues. The State Department describes the situation as fluid and says control of some towns appears to have changed hands several times. ABC's John Donovan has just gotten out of Baghdad, right on the deadline for all foreign journalists to leave. He crossed into Jordan earlier today. I spoke with him a short time ago and asked him to tell us how firm he believes Saddam Hussein's grip on power appears to be.
It's difficult to say whether or not Saddam Hussein's power is threatened, but there is certainly unrest. There's unrest in the sense that people are worn down, exhausted, they want change, they have stopped believing their newspapers. One day we were on the streets about a block away, we saw some sort of commotion. Plainclothes policemen and men in uniform came running out of nowhere from all around us and headed towards that focal point, carrying rifles. We were very quickly removed from the scene. I can't say what that was, but because the city at this moment is rife with rumors of clashes between demonstrators and security police, I suspect that that's what we were seeing, but we were moved away very quickly.
You've been under very strict censorship rules, and you have, as you say, been minded by Iraqi officials. Tell us to what extent this has prevented you from actually being able to find out the truth.
Occasionally, when that man wanders away or when the camera is turned off, people will tell us more specifically that life is not so good, that they're unhappy, that they're depressed. And in a few rare instances, people went so far as to say to us, why haven't the Americans come all the way? Why haven't they come to Baghdad? Why did they stop? One man even said to me, we would be better off living under the Americans. And a teenager said to me, why did you not finish the job?
Well, clearly now at this point, the authorities want all Western journalists out.
As we were moving out, there were some people, some Iraqis, who saw our departure as a terrible sign for them. I met a shopkeeper yesterday who said that he knew already that patrols were moving around the streets and arresting people. He said he had friends who were intellectuals who had already gone into hiding, and some people felt that our departure, in a sense, was Saddam pulling down the curtain, and they were very afraid about what was going to go on behind the curtain once we were on the outside. My feeling is that Saddam is going to hold on, primarily because for several years he has basically eliminated any opposition. He is already making moves to try to buy off some of the dissent in the population by giving them gifts. For example, he has granted an amnesty to anybody who deserted the battle in Kuwait. He's raising the sugar ration. He's canceling or suspending payments on mortgages, interest payments on mortgages. He's putting more soap into the marketplace. He's trying to buy off dissent on the one hand, and on the other, he's cracking down on dissent. Perhaps by kicking us out, he's pulling down the curtain so that he can take action behind the scenes when nobody's looking to really crack down.
Which is why Secretary of State Baker is on the road again. 7 countries in 10 days, pushing a long list of diplomatic initiatives while the sense of victory is still fresh. First stop, Saudi Arabia. ABC's John McWethy is traveling with the Secretary.
Because U.S. influence may never be higher than it is right now, Secretary Baker is urging Arab governments to consider new attitudes towards Israel. Here in Saudi Arabia, U.S. officials say they already detect a cautious new willingness by the Saudis to at least talk about it. But the core of Baker's visit to the region is the Gulf. How can it be made safe in the years to come so that oil needed by the West can flow without interruption? The U.S. would like Saudi Arabia to play a bigger role in assuring that. Baker is also trying to gauge how long the Saudis and Kuwaitis need American troops to stay on the ground here. The American view was expressed by General Schwarzkopf after he met with Baker.
That we're going to do everything we can to get the American forces back home just as fast as we possibly can, and that's our intention.
Tomorrow, Baker is to meet with the Emir of Kuwait, the reclusive leader who has refused to return to his homeland until both his safety and his creature comforts can be guaranteed. Baker will meet the Emir at a hotel in Taif, Saudi Arabia. Then the secretary will fly by himself to Kuwait City to meet that part of the Kuwaiti government that has returned. Officials say Baker will be listening closely to see if any member of the Kuwaiti royal family even mentions the possibility of elections, something the U.S. very much wants to hear. John McWethy, ABC News, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.